Rockers in Recovery Media is dedicated to carrying the message of addiction recovery through music, news, events, and festivals taking place within and not limited to the clean and sober community. Rockers in Recovery Radio is based on opinion only and is not meant to treat or diagnose any health or mental health issue of any kind. If you feel you need help for any health-related issues, please contact a physician or mental health professional. The opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of Rockers in Recovery.
Welcome to the show, Treatment and Recovery Radio Show, with your host, Jack Kelly. Jack, go ahead, tell us a little bit about you and what you're going to be talking about tonight. Let's get ready for the show. Jack Kelly, host of Treatment and Recovery Radio Show.
Well, I want to thank you so much for inviting me, John. I'll give you a little bit of background first for anybody that's listening. My sobriety date is October 8, 1975. So I've been continuously sober for 42 years. In the year 2000, I began working in the industry. So I've been working as a therapist now for 18 years, working with alcoholics and addicts. And I love the work that I do. But when I look back 42 years, I imagine, let's say the 12 steps were built about 100 feet back from the ocean. And they were standing up there, standing tall. And then one day a tsunami came by, and they got scattered all over the place, scattered, broken. And looking back on that now, the 12 steps that were passed on to us by the original members of Alcoholics Anonymous, we're not getting that message. We're getting little pieces of it. We're getting broken pieces of it. We're getting scattered pieces of it. So what I've done to put those pieces back together again is I have written one book, Radical Recovery, 12 Recovery Myths, The Addiction Survivor's Guide to the 12 Steps, in 2012. And I would say in May I'll have another book that will be available, and it's called Resilient Recovery, How to Conquer Your Addiction. Now, to some people, that might sound like a dirty word. How can you conquer your addiction? Well, we have two options only. We conquer our addiction, conquers us. That's it. There's no other option involved. And thank God the original members of the AA gave us the tools to do that. And one of the things we can take a look at is how did they go about it? They set two goals. One, they decided to go to any lengths to achieve victory over alcohol. Two, they decided to go to any lengths to find a spiritual experience. So, did they achieve victory over alcohol? They tell us the problem has been removed, it doesn't exist for us, gone, and it stays gone. Now, here's the catch. So long as we stay in fit spiritual condition. So, how did they stay in fit spiritual condition? They meditated every day. I used to think of our recovery literature as the books as roadmaps. And over the years, I really have come to look at them in a different way, not as roadmaps, but jigsaw puzzles where you have to connect the dots to put it all together. For example, I have asked probably over 1,000 people, alcoholics and addicts that I worked with in treatment, are there any requirements in our 12-step program? And the answer I get 100% of the time is a desire to stop drinking or using drugs. Are there any other requirements? Nope, no requirements. So let's think about this from a practical standpoint. Let's assume that you're diagnosed with cancer and you go down to the American Cancer Society and you want to find out if they have any requirements for membership. And the answer is no. No requirements, you can be a member. And then they say, well, how come you're interested in becoming a member? And you say, well, I've just been diagnosed with cancer. And they say, okay, John, are you interested in becoming a cancer survivor? And if the answer to that question is yes, well, there's a whole other set of requirements for that. And it works the same way with addiction. The only requirement that we have in our 12-step programs is a desire to stop drinking or using drugs. However, if we want to become addiction survivors, if we want to achieve victory over our addiction, whole other set of requirements for that. So where do we find them? 2 clues. First of all, at every meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Well, a path has steps. How many steps are on the path? There are 12 steps. Do we really have to take those 12 steps? I mean, it says in our literature that the 12 steps are suggestions. Bill Wilson was a genius. If he had said to people in the beginning when AA started that you have to do these 12 steps, we would have walked out the door. Nobody was going to tell us what to do. So he presented them as the 12 steps are suggested as a program recovery. But 17 years later, he wrote the book 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. And then he made very clear what he meant by the word suggested. And what he said in there is that for any alcoholic, and including addicts in that also, if we're not willing to embrace those 12 steps and practice them in our daily lives, we're signing our own death warrant. So it's like if you're going to jump out of a plane, it's suggested that you put on a parachute. So the changes that have taken place is now, you can do a Burger King approach. You can do it your way. You don't have to do this step. You can skip that step. And we certainly have the freedom to do all that. But we should not expect to get the same results that the original members of Alcoholics Anonymous did. But it's even more specific, and this is where you have to connect the dots in terms of the requirements. Because I would say anybody that's listening to this, if next time you go to a meeting and somebody says, who has a topic, raise your hand and say, are there any requirements in our program? And the only answer that you'll get in that room, I'd be willing to bet money on, is a desire to stop drinking, using drugs, no other requirements. So it's absolutely insane. We have a disease, a terminal disease, that if it's left untreated, it's going to kill us. And the only requirement we're told that we have involved in our program is simply just have this desire to not drink or use drugs. If we had the power to not drink and use drugs, we wouldn't even need the desire, but we don't have that power. And the 12 steps give us access to that power. But it's explained clearly if you connect the dots, the requirements for our program. So I'm just going to read through. There are 9 of them. 1, to get over drinking will require a transformation in thought and attitude. 2, belief in the power of God, willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. 3, in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they found a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. 4, almost none of us liked the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of our shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful completion. And those are the first 5 steps. The self-searching, 1, 2, and 3, the leveling of our pride, step 4, and the confession of our shortcomings, step 5, required. If you want to be a success with this, achieve success. 5, having made a personal inventory, what shall we do about it? This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, your candidate may give reasons why he need not follow the program. He may rebel at the thought of a drastic house cleaning which requires discussion with other people. 7, my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required, my beginning. 8. How do we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. 9. Burn the idea into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition, which I would say is a requirement, is that he trust in God and clean house. And the last one, which I stated earlier, number 10, unless each AA member follows to the best of their ability our suggested 12 steps of recovery, they almost certainly sign their own death warrant. So when you think of why we have such a high relapse rate, people are coming in thinking, well, just don't pick up, just don't drink and go to meetings. And if we go to enough meetings, my experience, personal experience, if we go to enough meetings and you have enough fear, you can go a good period of time without picking up a drink or a drug. But if you look up the word sober in the dictionary, it has two definitions. First is not drunk or high. The second is well-balanced, realistic, sensible, dignified, rational, not driven to extremes in emotion or thought. And we don't get that by simply not. Would you agree with that, John?
Yes.
I'm sure you would. So, going back to our beats, you have these 12 steps scattered all over the place, and now let's put them together. So the way that I would approach that, the way I do approach it in working with somebody for the first time, is ask them 3 questions which they don't know the answer to, but they'll understand why I asked the question, and then provide the answers. Number 1, what are the 12 steps? Why do we practice the 12 steps? What's their purpose? And again, if you go into any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and you ask, who can tell me the answer to these 3 questions, you're not going to get the answer. When Alcoholics Anonymous started, there was no television, there was no internet. So the entertainment came from either reading or listening to the radio. And today, reading is not one of our favorite pastimes. We get a lot of our information through the internet itself. Very little reading. So if we don't read the literature, it says that the answers are in the big book, and there are many answers in the big book and the other parts of our literature. But if we don't know where to look for the answers, we're not going to find them. So what are the 12 steps? I think it would be important, imagine putting yourself in the position now, those who are listening, of somebody coming into Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous for the first time. Understanding what these things are. The 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which, if practiced, can expel the obsession to drink and enable the sufferer to live a happy and useful and productive life. Now, what that definition offers somebody that's new is hope. Expelled. I got expelled when I was in high school, and they didn't want me back. So when it says that the 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in nature, which, if practiced as a way of life, can expel, that means they're gone, which blows away the whole concept of we are always recovering. If we're always recovering, and many of us are always recovering, but there are those of us, like myself and many of the original members of AA, who have recovered. I have recovered mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. The only thing that I cannot recover as an alcoholic and an addict is the ability to safely use alcohol or any other mood-altering substance. So in addition to recovering mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically, I have recovered my integrity, my self-esteem, a sense of gratitude, much more patience, much more tolerance, much more love as a result of program, these steps, and the power that they connect us to. So, once we understand what the 12 steps are, the next question is, why do we practice 12 steps? And the answer to that ties into that second definition of the word sober, being well-balanced, realistic, sensible, dignified, rational, not driven to extremes in emotional thought. We practice the 12 steps in our daily lives so that we and those about us can find emotional sobriety. And last but not least, what is their purpose? And in our recovery literature, it says our whole problem had been the misuse of willpower. We tried to bombard our problems with it. This is in 12 and 12, toward the end of step 3. And the purpose of the 12 steps is to have us align our will with God's will for us. And I remember when I read that, it would be really simple if God in some way let us know what the purpose was, or how do we align our will with His will. And I thought about it, well, we got some pretty good clues. How about obeying the 10 Commandments? I would think that would be the will of God. How about practicing spiritual principles in our lives, the 12 spiritual principles we find in the 12 steps? I would think that would be the will of God. And what I was looking for when I looked for God's will is for this white horse to come along, and I'll go to have this mission, go to Northern Ireland and straighten out the Catholics and Protestants. I'm ready to do all that. And had these grandiose ideas. And what I discovered time that God's will for me was to work on myself, become a better human being, to use the tools that are given to us in the 12 steps to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So one of the great myths in our program is that the steps should be taken in order. And if we were really supposed to take the 12 steps in order, then we shouldn't do a daily inventory. We shouldn't pray or meditate. And God forbid, help another alcoholic or addict until we complete the first 9 steps, which makes no sense whatsoever. So it makes an awful lot of sense, the way that the 12 steps are designed, to take those first 9 steps in order. But 10, 11, and 12 are maintenance steps. So we can start doing a daily inventory. If I have an argument with you in the course of a day, John, before the day is over, I want to call you back and get that cleaned up. Make apologies, make amends, or do whatever I have to do so I'm not taking it to bed with me. I'm not holding on to it for the next 20 years. We don't have to wait to complete the first 9 steps to do something like that. Prayer and meditation is what enables us to have the obsession and the compulsion removed from us. And the way that we stay clean and sober is by helping other alcoholics and addicts. And also somewhere in the 12 and 12, it says, when somebody comes in and they're new to the program, those who had some experience would take them out on 12-step calls. And they said, it may not sound like a great idea, but it actually turned out to be a great idea. This new guy may not have a lot to offer. But after he helps somebody else, God, does he feel good about himself. And all of us when we come in, we've got very low level of self-esteem. So by getting out of ourselves, doing something to help somebody else, we get some significant benefits from it. So the myths that have come to fill the rooms, powerless over our addiction, which is absolutely not true, according to what it says not only in the AA book, but also in Narcotics Anonymous. But if you take a look at step one, when it was written, Bill Wilson wrote the book Alcoholics Anonymous after he was sober for 3 years. He had input from the other members of AA who at that time were sober between 1 and 2 years. So when they said, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that is past tense. Doesn't say we are powerless over alcohol. It says we were powerless over alcohol. So am I just playing with words here? Not from what it says in the recovery literature. They had a goal, achieve victory over alcohol. Did they achieve the goal? Problem has been removed. Doesn't exist for us. It's gone. So the insanity of believing that we're powerless, and you can look at this from a couple of different perspectives. According to the Bible, you and I are made in the image and likeness of God. And if that's true, would that be an image of power or powerlessness? Power. It also says in the Bible that God gave us the power to rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the animals that roam the planet. We don't always use that power in a wise way, but we certainly have the power to rule over those things. And according to St. John, God is love. And if that's true, then I think it would be safe to assume that he also gave us the power to rule over ourselves. The obsessive thoughts, the compulsive feelings, the physical cravings that create so much pain and suffering in our lives. So one of the points that Bill Wilson made in when he wrote the book, as Bill Sees It, and that was written after he was sober for 33 years. And I've been to meetings, and I'm sure many people listening have been to meetings where somebody says, the only book you need to read is the big book. Well, some people say that about the Bible, and other people say that about the Quran. But when we take a look at Bill Wilson, he wrote the book Alcoholics Anonymous after being sober 3 years, and he wrote As Bill Sees It after he was sober for 33 years. So don't you think it's possible that he may have learned something over that 33-year period, and maybe he had something more to offer us? And one of the things that he offered us in there is his understanding of the program. And he said the sole purpose of the group is to teach and practice the 12 steps. And the big book is a text. Textbooks need to be taught. So the ideas that I'm presenting to you here, they're all in our recovery literature. But if you don't know how to connect the dots, if it doesn't come up to be a clear picture for you, you're never going to get the insight and I would have to say the enlightenment that comes with really clearly seeing and understanding the powerful, powerful message that they passed on to us. So when we take a look at that first step, when we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, to really understand that, we have to take a look at the 4 parts of powerlessness. There's the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual. On the physical level, a very simple way for us to understand the whole concept of powerlessness is this. If I gave you 10 X-Lax pills right now, where would you be sitting in 2 hours? On the toilet. There's a reason for that. Once you mix the chemicals in X-Lax, alcohol, or drugs with the chemicals in your body, the chemicals then write the next chapter in the story of your life. So think of it this way. Volcano inside us. It's quiet, it's dormant, and it's harmless until we put alcohol or drugs inside our body. Once we do that, the volcano erupts. The tsunami of cravings kicks in. And when that happens, our brain gets hijacked. No access to rational thought. I can lose a job, a career, a marriage, a relationship, my driver's license, go to prison. When the cravings kick in, No access to that. I love you. I promise you. I'm never going to do it again. I really mean it this time. Meant it every time I said it. But there's no access to that love when the cravings kick in, because the cravings are much more powerful than love. And you can believe that you walk with Jesus and Moses and Buddha and all the great spiritual teachers, that when the cravings kick in, no access to that either. Now, here's the key. If I don't put alcohol drugs inside my body, I don't become powerless. I think everybody listening would agree with that. So does that solve the problem? I just don't put it in my body. No, it doesn't. Because if you've gone through treatment, or when you came into AA or NA, let's say after 1 week, I put you in a room by yourself with your drug of choice, how long would it take before that was inside your body? Seconds, minutes, an hour? Most of us, within an hour, we'd be drunk or high, because the compulsion is there. You put a drink in front of me, you put a drug in front of me, going inside my body. There's no thought, there's just a compulsion, I'm there. The obsession, once I get it inside my body, then I'm off and running. And the way that works, I was at a meeting one time, and a guy said that he was sober about 5 years, was going through some business problems, personal problems, and he made a decision that he was just going to go out, get drunk that night, and come back to AA the next day. And he went out, got drunk that night, and came back to AA 11 years later. So once we get it inside our body, we got the obsession, the compulsion. I do not, as a human being, have the power to remove that from me. And that's the power that we gain access to the program. God, your higher power, that spirit of the universe, whatever you want to call it, something a hell of a lot more powerful than us. Once we connect to that, that can get lifted. And last is the spiritual part. And really, this part, which I'll wrap up on, the whole book, Alcoholics Anonymous, the solution they found, can be summed up in one sentence. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Would you like to get straightened out mentally and physically? I'm assuming the answer is yes. Then you must overcome the spiritual malady. Do you know what the spiritual malady is? I've asked this to hundreds of alcoholics and addicts, and I get this blank stare. If that's what we need to overcome, and nobody knows what the hell it is, or how we're supposed to overcome it, how are we supposed to become free from the slavery of addiction? And the spiritual malady, if you connect the dots, right after they talk about the spiritual maladies, is resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Fear was an evil and corroding thread. The whole fabric of our existence was shot through with it. Now throw in guilt and shame and boredom and depression and anxiety and worry, and you've got a full-blown spiritual malady. And if you think about why, time you relapsed, I'd be willing to bet a lot of money that it had something to do with one of those emotions. You were bored, you were angry, you were lonely, you were depressed, you wanted to change the way you feel, and you knew how to do that. So we need to put these pieces together that the tsunami kind of destroyed over the last 40 years and present the program the way that it was initially presented to us, so that people can achieve victory over alcohol, that we can recover. And the key is now, if I want to stay recovered, there are certain things I have to do. And that's explained in one sentence, that my sobriety is contingent upon the growth and maintenance of my spiritual condition. So how do I do that? Practice step 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. So it's not that complicated. And if you look at this in one other way, as far as the wisdom that was passed on to us by Bill Wilson, in a talk that he gave, I think it was in 1948, he said addiction is a cancer of the emotions and the soul. The emotions is where the spiritual malady comes in, and the soul, that spiritual part of us, that's the part of us that is loving and kind and compassionate and forgiving. And when we get consumed with these destructive emotions, with our anger and our resentments and our self-pity and our boredom, we get cut off from that. So it's been a pleasure, John, being on the show, and thank you for inviting me.
Amazing stuff, Jack. We want to thank you for being on. Radical Recovery host Jack Kelly. Check it out. Go to Amazon Books. Where else can they find Radical Recovery, Jack?
They can get them in any bookstore. And I published it under the name of Kelly to honor the anonymity part of our tradition. So it's Radical Recovery, Kelly, and if you do that on Amazon, it will come up, or if you go to a bookstore, you can get it there also.
Sounds great. All right, guys, Radical Recovery. Check it out Monday night, 6:30, right here at the Rockers and Recovery Radio Network. I want to thank Jack for hosting the show tonight. We look forward to having him back next Monday night. And guys, have a great night. God bless. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, John.
Rockers and Recovery Radio is based on opinion only and is not meant to treat or diagnose any health or mental health issue of any kind. If you feel you need help for any health-related issues, please contact a physician or mental health professional. The opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of Rockers and Recovery.
Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.